Let's talk about one of the biggest pieces of breaking news since the last time we jumped on here. It's Carson Wentz being moved to the Indianapolis Colts for a third-round pick. Colts obviously taking on a monster contract. I'll let you go first here, Alex. As a Colts fan, how excited are you for Carson Wentz trying to rejuvenate his career, pull a Ryan Tannehill up in Indy?
I'm excited. As a Colts fan, I always try to give the guy we got the benefit of the doubt. So last year with Rivers, I went in really excited, even after Rivers. It's kind of a similar situation. Like, Rivers was coming off the worst year of his career. People think he's done. He comes to the Colts. I was like, okay, Philip Rivers is going to be great for this team. We're, I think, a quarterback away from being a real contender. And Rivers obviously was okay, better than he was in LA with a better O-line, better weapons on offense. Well, probably not better weapons on offense, but a better O-line, a better run game, and a good defense. They were competitive. They made it pretty far last season. I was happy with it. But after seeing that, it's like Philip Rivers was clearly not the guy to take this team to a Super Bowl. Jacoby Brissett was clearly not the guy that has the caliber of play and ability and upside to take this team to a Super Bowl. Carson Wentz, though, is interesting because although his season last year was absolutely abysmal and we haven't seen him in really that MVP form since 2017, I was thrilled that the Colts made this trade. I know the cap number for Wentz is going to be huge, but the Colts have done a really good job of building through the draft. They have a good amount of cap space on this team. So it's not a matter of, now the Colts are pinched for cap space. We have more to spend. And I say we as a Colts fan, we have more to spend moving forward. If we want to try to bring in a big name receiver, there's the ability to do that. So the cap doesn't bother me. Giving up a third round pick and maybe it's a first or a second in 2022, I think was great value for the Colts to get Wentz. They didn't even have to give up that one this year, and it ended up not even being the two. So I think Wentz is an upgrade from Philip Rivers. As a Colts fan, I'm very, very excited to see what Wentz can do with a good defense in place, but also a good O-line and a good run game. Like, if you think about this is what really spells it out for me. Carson Wentz all season long was getting absolutely bodied in the pocket. Like, he didn't have a chance. And that starts to happen game after game after game. You get a little nervous back there as a quarterback, and even when the pressure's not coming, you feel like the pressure's coming. So I think Wentz can kind of take a step back with some more time in the pocket and things like that with the Colts next season to really excel. And what really made it obvious to me how important that is was Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. We saw a Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl that we have never seen before. It was a Patrick Mahomes that was struggling, a Patrick Mahomes that was running backwards, twirling around, doing all the Mahomes stuff that he's normally able to pull off. He wasn't able to do it. And quite frankly, Mahomes did not look like he was an MVP in the Super Bowl. And it was because the Bucs pass rush was all over him all game long. And I think to an extent, that's what we saw from Wentz last season. I'm excited to see Wentz come in with a good O-line and see if he can get his game back. Because if he can, I think the Colts are contenders. So I know I haven't even talked dynasty value yet. We will get into that. But I will say, as a Colts fan, I think Wentz still has some juice left in the tank. And if you held on through the low in dynasty, I think it's going to pay off for you next season.
From a dynasty standpoint, let me talk about that a little bit. I think it's the tale of two different Carson Wentzes. Is he the 2017, 2018, MVP nominee type of player that he was, or is he this 2020, just trying to play hero ball, had flashes but was taking a lot of sacks, throwing a ton of interceptions? He's also sustained a lot of injuries in his career, concussion, ACL, back issues, has 2 seasons where he missed about half the season. But for me, I'm optimistic about the move. I think the Colts are a damn near perfect landing spot for Carson Wentz. If he's going to have a rejuvenation, if he's going to get back to his old ways, I think the Colts are one of the few organizations that can do that for him right now. They had that top-tier offensive line you mentioned. No true superstars, but plenty of decent weapons all around him at wide receiver, running back, tight end. He's a defense now on the other side of the ball that should be able to take some pressure off. Maybe he doesn't need to play hero ball as much. And I don't believe the Colts would have taken on the contract and moved away that draft capital unless they really thought with all their heart and soul that they could fix whatever the issues were with Wentz. So do we think Wentz is like a Pro Bowler again? I doubt it in a new system after a brutal 2020, but I think he can still produce at a really, really high level, still in his prime at 28 years old. And I'm not sold necessarily on buying Wentz in Dynasty, in like a super flex league. because I just don't know if the ceiling there is really higher than other guys that are kind of near his value that I'd rather just be able to buy low, like a Matt Ryan, a Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, these 4,000 yard a year pocket passers. And I think there's more risk with Wentz than any of those options that I just named based on what we saw in 2020. So just give me the cheapest of that group. That's kind of my mindset with that tier of quarterbacks. So if they do end up having a good year, like Matt Ryan has an MVP season, okay, you sell him for peak value, move on to another pocket passer. But let's talk about the weapons. What are the implications all across the board for fantasy? Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines, Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, Jack Doyle, Mo Alley Cox, Trey Burton. Are you optimistic for all these weapons now and potentially if they bring in some receivers through the draft or in free agency?
Yeah, I definitely am. And, there's a lot of buy-in to tendencies and things like that. Like, Phillip Rivers throws to the running back a ton, so now Rivers is gone. So with Wentz, Nyheim Hines loses value. And maybe a little bit, but I think it's more of a scheme thing with this Colts team. So I think Wentz helps the value of Jonathan Taylor significantly for some of those scoring opportunities. I think he lifts the value of the tight ends. We know he loved both Ertz and Goddard in Philly. So that is a tendency thing, but it's definitely not going to hurt those tight ends. And with the arm that Wentz has, I think it's going to be a lift for those guys and for the receivers as well. I think for Paris Campbell and Michael Pittman, if we're going to see a breakout from those guys, I think there's a much higher likelihood we were able to see that happen with Carson Wentz than we were able to with Phillip Rivers last season. Both guys that can get it done down the field. So with Wentz's arm being stronger than Rivers was as a 40-year-old last season, I think it helps those guys. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with T.Y. Hilton and with the free agent receivers on the market. T.Y. is set to hit free agency. I'm really interested to see what the Colts decide to do. I'm a big T.Y. Hilton fan, but I would still love to see them bring in a true alpha wide receiver one. There's a lot of guys this season that are potentially going to be free agents. Kenny Golladay, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, Juju Smith-Schuster, Corey Davis, Curtis Samuel, A.J. Green, Marvin Jones, T.Y. Hilton. So some of those guys I'd obviously prefer more than others. I wouldn't necessarily want all of them, but there's options there. And some of those guys are going to hit the open market. So the Colts are going to have options. They're still going to have the cap space to get things done. And if they do go out and bring in a true wide receiver one type guy, think about an Allen Robinson, a Kenny Golladay, a Chris Godwin, I think that's going to bode really well for those guys being the true number one target in this offense.
Yeah, I do think it is a slight upgrade to Rivers. Even if Wentz just improves slightly, like let's say he regresses back to his old self, even just to a small degree, I still think that's plenty there for all the weapons. Rivers in 2020, 543 pass attempts, completed 68% of those for 4,200 yards, 24 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, was 10th in the league in yards per attempt. Carson Wentz, if we take his 2020, extrapolate that out to 16 games because he did, Jalen Hurts came in. But Wentz, 582 attempts, 57% completion rate, yikes, 3,500 yards, 21 touchdowns, 20 interceptions. So if he can just improve on that horrible 2020 season slightly, be a little bit more efficient, get the passing yards closer to 4,000, I think he can match Rivers' 24 touchdowns. And if his completion rate gets closer to his career average of 63%, he was at 57% last year. Like I feel like that has to improve at least to some degree with a new system, just because he's going to have more time to throw. And honestly, like he just needed a reboot.
Yeah.
I think he can get that here. So I think both of us are optimistic. I think I'm more cautiously optimistic. I'm definitely not buying Wentz himself, but I'm pretty excited for the weapons here. Are you trying to buy or sell any of these guys right now with Wentz impacting their value?
Before we move on, there's you're right. I don't think there's any weapons that I'm necessarily going to be more interested in buying or more interested in selling just because of the Wentz news. I don't think it's that much of a game changer for the other weapons on Indy's offense. But I want to talk about Wentz himself. You talked about not wanting to buy him. I think he's, I want him on my Dynasty team, but only because I'm a Colts fan. But I think he's an interesting sell right now because there's this hype about Carson Wentz getting traded to the Colts. People have these big imaginations of, oh, he's going to return to MVP form. Oh, he has Frank Reich. Oh, it's the greatest thing to ever happen. So if there are people in your league, and I'm talking to you, you know who you are in our league who has Carson Wentz. If there are people in your league that are coming to you trying to acquire him, it might not be a bad time to trade him because his value might be as high right now as it's going to be until we see him play week one. And depending on what happens week one, it's either going to go way up or it's going to go way down. So if you want to hedge your bet a little bit, right now is a prime time to sell Carson Wentz. And if you're buying, maybe wait until some of the hype dies down, until we're talking, about the rookies in the draft, or we're getting into camp and things like that, and try to sneak in a low ball offer for Wentz then. But it's going to be really, really hard to buy him for a fair price, because I just don't know what to expect. For me, he's probably, if we're talking dynasty leagues, a middle of the pack quarterback 2. He's right in that range of guys like Kirk Cousins. I would probably take Matt Stafford over Wentz at this point. Stafford's several years older, but I think the upside and the consistency for where he's going to be in that Rams offense with McVay is more of a sure thing. So he's right in that middle QB2 tier. But at 28 years old, if he comes out and lights the world on fire this season, man, you could end up having the upside of a top 10 dynasty quarterback. I think that's the ceiling here for Carson Wentz.